On December 31, 1944, Patton's mobile workshops moved into Utrecht, Belgium, 12 miles from the road to Bastogne. The United States Ordnance Tank Repair Unit did not find a factory waiting there. It found snow-covered fields, narrow streets, frozen tools, and damaged tanks coming south from battle. Behind Patton's fast-moving columns was a second army of mechanics, welders, drivers, recovery crews, and parts specialists. Their job was to turn disabled machines into fighting vehicles before the front moved again. A tank that looked like a wreck might return within hours. Another might be stripped for parts, evacuated farther back, or declared beyond repair. The difference was not decided in Detroit. It was decided beside a Belgian road, often under artillery fire. How could a wrecked tank return to battle without going back to America? One documented unit provides the answer. The 128th Armored Ordnance Maintenance Battalion served with the 6th Armored Division, one of the formations fighting under the United States Third Army. Its wartime history follows the battalion from Normandy through France, the Ardennes, and into Germany. It also records the workshops, recovery vehicles, repair totals, and mistakes that made the system real. These were not private workshops created by General George Patton. They were part of the Army's organized maintenance structure. Yet Patton's style of war made their work especially important. Third Army could move only while its tanks, trucks, guns, and recovery vehicles moved with it. The repair system began at the front. Tank crews and unit mechanics handled work they could complete with their own tools. When damage exceeded their reach, ordnance contact parties moved forward to inspect the vehicle. A mechanic might repair it where it stood, make it mobile enough to reach a shop, or call for recovery. That decision saved time. Towing every disabled Sherman deep into the rear would have crowded roads and delayed repairs. Leaving every difficult job to the crew would have stranded valuable equipment. The Army built a ladder instead. Each damaged vehicle moved only as far back as the tools, parts, and labor required. The 128th carried much of that capability inside the Armored Division. Its companies included automotive, armament, supply, and evacuation specialists. Their shop was not one building. It was a moving network of wreckers, tank retrievers, heavy transporters, machine tools, welding gear, spare parts, and men trained to use them. That network had to keep pace with the advance. During the race across France, distance became an enemy of maintenance. The battalion's history records a trip back to Cherbourg for tank tracks. 96 trucks carried track, while additional vehicles hauled supplies for a Third Army depot. The convoy became scattered across half of France before it finally delivered its load. The episode exposed the contradiction behind mobile warfare. Tanks gained ground by moving fast, but their workshops needed heavy equipment and thousands of parts. A broken track pin could stop a vehicle as effectively as enemy fire. A repair battalion could not simply arrive. It had to arrive with the correct steel. By late September, the 6th Armored Division had gathered near Nancy. The battalion occupied damaged buildings at an airfield and turned them into shops. From there, it placed evacuation sections at combat command service parks closer to the fighting. The unit history makes a striking claim about two limited operations in this period. All reparable fighting equipment was returned to its combat unit within 12 hours of evacuation. That figure did not describe every tank in every battle. It showed what a prepared repair chain could achieve when the division paused long enough to assemble men, parts, and shop space. The airfield also became a production line. Before the November offensive, the battalion fabricated and welded track extensions known as duckbills onto the division's medium tanks. Crews worked around the clock until every medium tank was prepared for the jump forward. This was the hidden factory behind the armored spearhead. It had no permanent roof, fixed assembly line, or reliable power grid. It moved when the division moved. Still, it organized labor by task, repeated modifications across a fleet, inspected the result, and returned finished machines to their users. If this evidence-led look at military machines is useful, subscribe to Arsenal Archives. The next stage shows what happened when the workshop had to operate in snow, under fire, beside Bastogne. In late December, the German offensive in the Ardennes forced Third Army to turn north. The 6th Armored Division joined the counterattack, and Company A of the 128th moved into a turret on New Year's Eve. The village stood on the main highway toward Bastogne. The company selected fields as shop space. A surviving photograph labels the scene as a winter playland, but the image shows the reality behind the joke. Vehicles and equipment sit in open snow, with no factory walls separating mechanics from the weather. For 3 weeks at a turret, Company A serviced and repaired 42 medium tanks for further duty. Its history also records more than 55 other major repair jobs. Those numbers matter because they came from one company, in one location, during one winter operation. The shop could not wait for every wreck to reach a turret by chance. Captain Johns and Lieutenant Bragg established a collecting point at Hollange, southeast of Bastogne. It shortened the distance between the fighting vehicles and the mechanics who could save them. The evacuation section at Hollange numbered 17 men. Its recorded equipment included 3 prime movers, 2 wreckers, and a tank retriever. The men guarded the position in shifts and slept beside their machines. Their workshop began wherever a cable could reach a disabled tank. Recovery was often harder than repair. A tank off the road might weigh more than 30 tons before mud, snow, or a broken suspension added resistance. The crew first had to reach it, check for mines, attach cables, pull it onto firm ground, and move it without losing the recovery vehicle as well. One Company A account describes 6 tanks halted in a snow-covered minefield. The recovery men winched 5 to the road and prepared them for transport. The 6th could not be removed. During the effort, a heavy mover struck a mine and lost a wheel, although its driver escaped injury. That episode corrects a common picture of armored losses. A disabled tank was not automatically destroyed, and a recovered tank was not automatically reparable. The ordnance crew had to classify the damage. Its judgment determined whether men spent hours restoring a vehicle or used it to supply parts for others. The decisive tool was therefore not a single crane or wrench. It was the recovery chain. Contact parties identified the problem. Evacuation crews brought the vehicle to a collecting point. Heavy transporters carried it to the company shop. Mechanics, welders, armorers, and instrument specialists then worked in parallel. At a turret, that chain remained close enough for tank crews to wait near the shop. The company history notes that the meal line sometimes approached 300 men because crews awaiting repaired vehicles joined the ordnance soldiers. That detail reveals the purpose of the entire system. The repair was not complete when an engine ran. It was complete when the crew could take its machine back. Once a tank entered the shop area, the work divided into specialties. Automotive mechanics handled engines, transmissions, tracks, brakes, and suspension. Armament men worked on guns and their mounts. Instrument specialists checked sights and other precision equipment. Welders repaired damaged metal or attached approved modifications, while the parts section searched its stock and requested whatever the company did not carry. This division of labor made the field shop resemble a factory, but the raw material was never uniform. One Sherman might need a track repaired and a road wheel replaced. Another might arrive with a damaged gun mount, electrical faults, and armor torn open. Mechanics could not follow one assembly sequence. They had to diagnose each machine, plan the work, and keep scarce lifting equipment moving between jobs. Safety also began before repair. A wartime account from a turret describes a tank that reached the shop with a round still inside its gun. A mechanic accidentally pressed the firing control, and the dud projectile crossed the work area before striking a small vehicle. No one was hurt, but the crew adopted a stricter habit of checking gun chambers before work began. The incident reveals why experience mattered. These mechanics were not simply civilian tradesmen wearing uniforms. They worked on loaded weapons, damaged armor, powerful engines, and vehicles that might still contain mines or unexploded ammunition. Speed mattered, but a rushed inspection could destroy the very workshop the tank had entered. Parts completed the chain. A serviceable component could come from company stock, an army depot, or a vehicle that could not economically be restored. Salvage was not proof of desperation. It was a planned way to prevent one irreparable machine from holding several reparable tanks out of action. Some work happened even closer to the enemy. The unit record describes mechanics sent forward to repair tank guns while the vehicles occupied firing positions. On another occasion, a mechanic removed a periscope sight from a knocked-out tank while artillery fire forced him repeatedly down into the turret. These accounts should not be turned into a claim that every repair happened under fire. Most workshop labor depended on organized space behind the line. But the contact parties and recovery sections lived at the dangerous boundary between combat and maintenance. They entered areas that ordinary depots never had to reach. The system also changed tanks instead of merely restoring them. Around Bastogne, battalion welders added armor plate to tank fronts and turrets. Recovery crews transported medium tanks south to shops at Esch for this work. Modification, repair, salvage, and replacement often shared the same road. Company A moved from a turret into battered Bastogne in late January. Power and water were unavailable, and the shop again occupied open ground. From there, its evacuation platoon operated around the clock. The unit history records the transportation of 43 tanks from Bastogne to Saint-Lez and to Esch, about 40 miles to the south. The movement was slow, heavy, and vulnerable. A transporter loaded with a tank could bog down on a damaged road and block traffic needed by the entire army. Night work reduced visibility. Ice reduced control. Enemy fire, mines, and mechanical failure threatened the rescuers as well as the wreck. Even a repaired tank could be lost before it returned. One Company A mechanic completed a repair and began a road test near Bastogne. The tank struck a mine hidden in snow. Its suspension was destroyed, its lower armor buckled, and the vehicle was replaced rather than repaired again. That decision was not failure. It was discipline. Mobile ordnance worked because mechanics understood when to stop. Time, parts, transport capacity, and battlefield need all had value. Saving one hopeless wreck could delay several vehicles that were easier to restore. The wider battalion record shows the scale of that judgment. Its wartime history tallied 2,375 armored vehicle repair jobs, including work on medium tanks, light tanks, armored cars, self-propelled guns, tank destroyers, and half-tracks. It also listed thousands of artillery and small arms jobs. Those figures require care. They count repair jobs, not necessarily unique vehicles, and they cover more than tanks. They do not prove that every damaged Sherman returned to combat. They reveal something more useful. An armored division generated a continuous industrial workload, and it carried a large part of that workload across Europe. Patton's mobile workshops were therefore mobile in layers. The frontline contact team carried only what it needed to diagnose or make an immediate repair. The collecting point gathered disabled machines. The company shop concentrated specialists and equipment. Army depots farther back handled jobs beyond the division's capacity and supplied replacements. The result was not a miracle, and it did not erase battlefield losses. Burned-out hulls, catastrophic penetrations, missing parts, and destroyed suspensions could end a tank service. Supply shortages could halt skilled mechanics. Rapid advances could stretch the workshops until the distance to parts became almost as important as the distance to the enemy. Yet the system gave Third Army an advantage no armor plate could provide. A tank disabled today did not always become a permanent loss. Recovery crews first had to reach it and confirm that the hull remained reparable. With the right parts available, the machine could rejoin its crew without crossing an ocean. The 128th Armored Ordnance Maintenance Battalion shows how. At Nancy, it turned a damaged airfield into a production line. At Hollange, 17 men pushed the recovery chain toward Bastogne. At Attert, one company repaired 42 medium tanks in 3 winter weeks. Around Bastogne, evacuation crews moved 43 tanks along icy roads to the shops that could handle them. Patton's tanks did not advance on engines and tracks alone. They advanced on cables, welds, spare parts, road tests, and the decisions of mechanics working behind the columns. A wrecked tank returned to battle because the factory did not remain in America. The Army broke that factory into movable pieces and sent it across Europe. Arsenal Archives follows the engineering, logistics, and human work behind historic war machines. Subscribe for the next documentary.